about the African Union, as far as Palestine is concerned. We know that African Union, obviously, collectively, being very, very critical of Palestine, but there are concerns. There are concerns as far as individual African nations are concerned. What is their position as far as Israel is concerned, and also Palestine? Suraya, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome.
Walaikum salam and jazakallah for having me.
Yes, a very interesting piece that you've written, Surya, talking about time to call out AU members on Palestine, where you mention that collectively Africa talks a lot of good about Palestine, but individually African countries looking the other way around when it comes to the occupation.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, firstly, I think we just need to emphasize that the African Union and its predecessor, the Organization for African Union, or the OAU, Palestine has always been very high on the agenda of those continental organizations. So Africa has always stood in solidarity with Palestine. When it was the OAU, Yasser Arafat attended many of the summits. He spoke at them. So there's no question that there really is a deep-seated historic solidarity between Africa and Palestine. And when I say Africa, I'm talking about the AU, or previously the OAU. That there is no question. But what we've seen in recent times is that whilst the AU, as it is now, has released very strong statements, certainly stronger than any other regional bloc, and very detailed statements about Israel's violations of Palestinian rights, about the need to end the occupation, and very firmly in support of Palestinian statehood and the right of Palestinians to have self-determination. And that's what happens in Addis Ababa, generally, where the AU meets. And at the last summit, which ended about 2 weeks ago, it was no different. It was a great statement, very powerful. But the problem is that when each of those countries goes back, the leaders go back home, they have a very different relationship with Israel. And when they vote at the United Nations individually as a state, they say very different things. And a lot of the time, what they do individually contradicts what they are signing on to as an AU member. And the issue is that if the AU says that it's in solidarity with Palestine, then maybe it now needs to start calling out some of its members whose actions at home are in direct contrast to what they say when they meet as a collective body. So what do I mean that, some of the actions are contradictory? So we'll take as an example, in 2018, when during the Great Return March on May 14th, Israel killed over 60 Palestinian protesters, and that massacre was compared very widely to the Sharpeville massacre. There was really strong statements coming out of the AU around that issue. At the same time, when Israel was doing that, there were African AU members who were in attendance at the inauguration of the American Embassy in Jerusalem. The AU as well spoke out and issued a strong statement against Trump's decision to recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. And all of these countries signed on, but there were a few that decided to attend. So what they signed on to and what they actually did are two different things. And I think for me most concerning, and that was the thrust of the article that appeared yesterday in the Sunday newspapers, was that when they are at the AU, there are a large number of African countries that abstain on really important resolutions. So as I said, the AU is 100% in support of Palestinian statehood and respects the right of Palestinian self-determination. Every year at the UN, there is an annual resolution where countries vote on the right of Palestinians to have self-determination in their own state. So you'd expect all of those African countries who sign on to it at the AU to also vote in the same way and support it at the UN, but they don't. And there's been several that choose to abstain. And that's kind of what I mean when I say they look away. I'm not saying that they're voting for Israel, but they're choosing not to vote on the right side of history. And, as Archbishop Desmond Tutu said, that if you remain neutral in situations of oppression, then really you're just aiding the oppressor.
Yes, and I think, Surya, you make a very valid point, and this is something that I was just checking out over the weekend as well, because I'm hosting a webinar on the Khilafah, the fall of the Khilafah tomorrow evening, and central to the fall of the Khilafah was Palestine and the creation of this illegitimate state of Israel. Because that is exactly what had happened. And when you make mention of colonization, and we've seen how colonization had basically started at the time of the Khilafah, and that includes Africa as well. And that basically gave rise to colonialism and occupation. And this is the point that you are making, that it is these African nations who have emerged from being colonized, and now some of them refuse to endorse the basic rights of the people of Palestine to have their own state.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. That I think is, especially if publicly, and it's not just at the AU, the African group, so it's basically all the African countries, at the United Nations Human Rights Council in Geneva, all of the African countries, they release a statement. Also, when they're discussing the issue of the Israeli occupation of Palestine, it's an annual debate that happens. And the African group, again, releases a really, really strong statement. It's grounded in international law, and clearly there's an understanding and an acceptance of the illegality of Israel's occupation. As a collective, that statement's great. But individual states do a lot of different things. And maybe it's important as well to understand the context in which some of those actions occur, because Israel, certainly since 2016, has launched a very, very offensive diplomatic charm on African countries. And essentially, they're trying to buy support for the occupation by offering many countries aid, technology, especially water and agricultural technology. And the Netanyahu regime in particular has basically told many African leaders that, listen, you have pressing problems of food scarcity, water scarcity, you have issues with terrorism, you have issues with cyber technology, and of course Israel is going to help you, but in return there's a diplomatic repayment, and that repayment is not voting for resolutions that are critical of Israel. So we essentially, and Netanyahu stated this very publicly, that he wants to dissolve African solidarity. There are 54 countries on the continent, and each of them essentially has voted more or less in a pro-Palestine way, and he wants to kind of get rid of that block of solidarity. So that is an important consideration when we talk about what is Africa doing at the UN.
Yes. Now, also, I think just one more thing. Obviously, the whole question surrounding the peace deals that have been signed with Israel, and some of them being African countries, Morocco, Sudan as well. And, when you're talking about the Israeli aggressive lobby in Africa and winning over African support, and this is where the danger also lies, because when you have countries like Morocco and Sudan that have already signed, we don't know which other African countries will follow suit.
Yeah, I'm particularly concerned about African countries that are members of the Arab League, because I think that the Emirati normalization deal, Bahrain, those have set very dangerous precedents, particularly for African Arab League countries, because, I mean, essentially the Arab League didn't condemn any of those normalization agreements that were signed with Gulf countries. And so African countries are now going to say, well, look at these Gulf states. Firstly, they had loads of acceptance, and they had loads of goodwill coming from the Trump administration for normalizing ties with Israel. And now they seem to have trade, and things are going great with Israel. So why shouldn't we, as Africans, also sign normalization deals? So Arab League African countries, those are of particular concern because of the fact that Gulf countries have set such a dangerous precedent. The other issue, I think, when we talk about normalization and Africa's relationship with Israel, also centers around Christianity and the fact that in large areas of Africa, in terms of the way, particularly evangelical and Pentecostal charismatic churches, Israel is seen as a source of blessings. Israel, you've got to pray for Israel, and the Israel that is the political state is conflated with the biblical concept of Israel. And if you criticize Israel, you're going to earn the wrath of God and you're going to be cursed. That is really the sort of broad understanding of Israel within a large section of African Christians. And so that's something that Israel has really, really capitalized on and used it almost as a marketing tool, to buy support for the occupation.
Well, Suraya, quite interesting, I must say. The piece that you've written, obviously, a lot of food for thought here. And as always, we thank you. We thank you for your time with us here on Salam Media. We wish you all the best. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Osman's Taj Mahal Spice and Rice. For over 80 years, Osman's Taj Mahal have been